Hello and welcome to this week's edition of My Business Rules. I'm Mfupi, standing in for Chris Bishop. Now today we find ourselves in the city of Centurion. We're here to speak to Andries Fourie, Chief Executive of Poynting Holdings, to unpack this JSE listed firm a little bit further for us. Let's find out why his business rules.
Good day, I'm Andries Fourie, CEO of Poynting Holdings. Even though we want to become a world-class company, we do not want to become a big corporate. So our values is really people working independently in small teams, having full authority about what they do. One of the mottos of the company is don't ask permission, ask for forgiveness, which means that rather try something. We don't mind if you fail, but don't sit there and do nothing.
Well, we're now joined by the Chief Executive of Poynting and Tenors, that's Andries Fourie. Thank you so much for joining us today, Andries. Good to speak to you. Walk us through your story as an entrepreneur. Where did that spark begin to shine for you?
I'm never too sure. My father was actually a bank manager, so he moved around a lot, which made me quite adaptable, but he always told me, never go work for salary, because he of course dealt with business people. So at school I started buying things like old radios, fixing them and starting to sell them. That was a bit of inheritance from my grandfather, who was an actual farmer. And I think I grew up in an extremely Afrikaans environment, including the typical army conscription at the time. And there I got advice by a guy. I think I got a very multicultural exposure, which is things people miss about that military background that all of us were forced to take. And he said to me, you must go to English university, you can't be this Afrikaans. And I chose at that time to go to Wits University, which was a strange thing for Afrikaans boy to do. At that time, they've just burned the flag and things like that. And that was a wonderful experience. I think it opened my eyes to how well you can do if you mix different cultures together. So a completely different experience, much more than just a language at the time. I also stayed on there. I got a part job, sort of a research job, as well as studying for my MSc.
At the university?
At the university. And then decided to complete a PhD, which was also strange. I don't think anyone in our family has ever thought of doing it. I find actually the PhD part was easier than the normal undergraduate. Undergraduate was
really?
tough. But within 1 year of leaving my fourth year, I started lecturing because my lecturer at that time emigrated to the United Kingdom. And I was the only guy knowing something about antennas. You can imagine, not that much. And started building a research group. And in the 90s, we formed a company to start doing consulting work. And the company operated for about 10 years from Wits, where we grew a very impressive research group. Quite a few PhDs graduated under my supervision. And we created a really bright team of people. And in 2000, we said, we want to start manufacturing low-cost antennas. Can you believe that in South Africa?
Sheesh, Andries, that takes a lot, no doubt. But I want us to touch on that spark. You met individuals at the University of Witwatersrand. The capital that you needed as well as the skills, how did you manage to pull all of those together?
The skills was easy at that time because they were all around me. And I always had lots brighter guys than me around me. So skills at that time was easy. Capital was a much more difficult matter. At that time, we actually got funded, and I would say it was close to VC by the IDC, the Industrial Development Corporation. We got DTI funding, so we really bootstrapped things. They gave us a bit of a loan, the IDC. Then we got funding from the DTI Special Program for Industrial Innovation. We even got from the military some funding that they had to turn swords into plowshares, so they had a bit of funding for that. And that all, so I credit the government with starting our company. They really helped us in the beginning to be able to start the company. And then it was a bootstrap. I mean, we did some consulting, which gave you a sort of running income. We were well established at the time and started manufacturing. And it was pretty difficult in the beginning. There's tons of things you have to learn. You must remember we were true techies. So we had to realize you need management, you need HR, you need quality systems and so forth.
Exactly, the business perspective.
Steep curve.
Exactly, but that's a story that, as you mentioned, was born back in the 90s, but fast track to 2014 and where we are now, sitting in this warehouse here in Centurion. Explain to us, where are we, what exactly takes place here regarding Poynting's productivity?
So Poynting started essentially with two major divisions. The one was in terms of the local cellular. At first it was Wi-Fi, but nowadays virtually purely cellular end-user antennas. Once again, born from Africa. In 2000, I had a friend in Botswana that couldn't get cell phone reception. Botswana didn't have a network, but they were close to South African one. So we converted the television antenna into a cellular antenna.
A television antenna, the bunny ears?
No, the long ones that sit on your roof.
Oh, yes.
We had a pretty novel antenna that never succeeded in the television market, turned it into a cellular antenna, and these guys could then make local calls from Botswana, from Gaborone. We sold quite a few there, then realized there's a market with farmers. This was completely unknown. You don't put a massive antenna on a cell phone. But where people struggled, that was a good solution. And from this basis, we developed a whole set of what I call outdoor cellular antennas. And in about 4, 5, 6 years back, where people started using cellular data, these things really came in right, because for cellular data, you can actually tolerate an outdoor antenna, because indoor you can put Wi-Fi, for example. People typically sit down when they're using a computer and so forth. And we really found that the market took to it, started exporting large quantities to Europe, strangely enough, Scandinavia being big users. But it was really because no one else in the world ever thought of making, like I say, massive antennas for cell phone usage. And then we had a military side that flourished. It started off with various military projects. South African military collapsed. And I always say any problem is an opportunity in disguise, because we started exporting. And today they virtually export all of their products, very, very high-tech products. And of course, the two feed on each other. We find sometimes for the cellular bands, because it needs very broad frequency bands, we develop technology designs, which they use because they do, for example, jamming of cell phones for the purpose of protecting people against these roadside bombs and so forth.
That makes a lot more sense, and it puts things into perspective given the different pillars that you have within your organization. But walk us through as well some of the staff members that are here. Just before we started this interview, you mentioned that there are individuals who've been with this company for years on end, and I'm sure they've managed to grow within the ranks.
Yes, I mean, I think because of my academic background, we've, for example, got a policy that if anyone wants to study anything, the company pays for it and they can study. So we've had people starting, say, as a receptionist, ending as a sales manager, and during that time perhaps completing a BCom degree at UNISA. We've had guys here starting where literally I had one guy that I mentioned to you, a guy called Aaron, that sanded my doors, and I just noticed this guy was incredibly industrious. He drove 10 kilometers, decided to employ him today. He's actually a manager in charge of our industrialization. So trained himself, went on courses and so forth. It's one of my beliefs. We've seen many people that's not necessarily highly qualified, but if they're willing, like I say, brave, courageous, we push them as far as they wish to go. And it's a nice feeling. So a lot of the people actually came from modest backgrounds and now quite successful guys in the company.
How important that is that for you in particular, because it's talent retention in an industry where talent is scarce across the board in the engineering fraternity?
Talent certainly is scarce, and talent in terms of people that fit in with our culture, because our culture is pretty informal. You have to...
So am I overdressed for this occasion?
not in terms of dress, but we don't believe in a big hierarchy. We believe in small, motivated teams where people are taking authority, responsibility, and we allow them to do that. And many people find that they want to be told what to do, they want to sit in a strict hierarchy, and these people don't fit in. So I find the talent in terms of people having been here a long time is actually quite valuable, because they also retain that culture. And new people come in, it rubs off.
Exactly. Has that stood you in good stead, given the fact that you didn't start off at a corporate company, but started from the basics? You were adverts, you got your team together, started this company, and now have managed to mold and structure your own culture, as you say.
That's right. And I always thought it was normal, but realized over time that firstly the company, I've got a strong belief, like I say, in multicultural. So we've really got, I'm not just talking about typical South African black, white. We've got people of every race, religion, and quite a few from other countries working for us. And I found this to be a huge strength. That's also why our whole belief as a company is international success. Now, we're internationally still very small, but every product and every business we purchase, we believe must have international potential. I just believe that a company that only operates because it's protected in an environment like our country because of either transport duties or otherwise is not really successful. And if you're internationally successful, you feel you've actually done something right.
Walk us through that from a business sense, because you have some of your operations where your products are manufactured in China. I take it from a cost-cutting perspective, it works out a lot cheaper, but the operating environment there versus the other places where you have operations on the continent, like the likes of Nigeria and other places.
If you look at China, it's on the one hand low cost, but what it really is, they've got an ecosystem, which worries me in South Africa, ecosystem where you've got all of the suppliers. So you would have 200 plastic injection molders, stamping people and so forth in the vicinity of Shenzhen, which is just north of Hong Kong. They've got a wonderful work ethic. The people there, I think, are highly educated, all of them, as a result of communism. I think everyone there is completely literate, and when they come to these areas, they're all almost migrant workers. So in China, the favorite saying is, that means, where do you come from? No one comes from the area in which they work. So they all want to work there. They've got holidays where they get back to their families, but when they work, they like to work 12 hours. If you can't give them overtime there, they leave you and go work for another company. But different culture, different people. I find them wonderful people, wonderful food, variety and so forth. But certainly productive people, but it's logistically very advantageous because we can now export. We export straight from there to United States, Europe and so forth. So there's huge logistic advantages in using China, and scalability. So in other words, in South Africa, you have to each time go to a new building, whatever, if you're increasing and growing the business, whereas now you can grow it without necessarily growing the overhead sitting here.
Andries, just to close off with, you are CEO of a fantastic company. It's listed on the JSE. The share price has also had a phenomenal performance. You've got good relations with your employees from what we can tell. But what keeps you awake at night?
Not much. I tend to be an absolute optimist.
Well,
People have called me insanely optimistic. There's of course things that keep us awake. The strike now was threatening to become a real problem because our USA customers, for example, when you talk force majeure in Europe, they include strikes. The US guys quite specifically told us that strikes for them is not their problem. And they measure you very strictly in terms of delivery times and so forth. So things like our level of education, skills in the country in the long run, I think are the biggest things that need to be addressed. And I think businesses can do that, as we've often done, but really we need to make sure that our people, like the Chinese people, come out of matric and are really capable of going anywhere in terms of literacy, math skills and so forth.
Well, we like your optimism. Hopefully that will continue further. Andries Fourie, such a pleasure speaking to you today. That's the Chief Executive of Poynting and Tennis.